Well, for more of the European angle now, I'm joined by Jasmine El-Gamal. She's at the European Council on Foreign Relations. She joins us live from Istanbul. And thank you very much for being with us on France 24 tonight. Now, as we just heard, the US is ramping up the sanctions. We've just had another round announced tonight. Meanwhile, European countries, namely France, Germany and the UK, are still trying to save the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. Is there any chance of that happening?
There isn't a great chance of the JCPOA being saved. I mean, President Trump campaigned very, very strongly on the fact that the JCPOA was a very bad deal. He spent his entire presidency so far talking about how bad a deal it was and how he needs to get a better deal and will get a better deal. Everything that he's done so far, from laterally from the JCPOA to reimposing sanctions to now these latest sanctions, tells us that he wants a different deal, a better deal, a deal that he can claim for himself.
Now, both Trump and the Iranians say they don't want war. That's what they keep saying, despite the numerous incidents that we've seen in the Gulf in recent weeks. How worried is Europe about some kind of military confrontation? What is the plan?
It's hard to tell what the plan is. I mean, the plan for Europe is to try to decrease tensions as much as they can before some unintended consequence happens. You know, I think you said it right. Neither Iran nor the U.S. wants a war. They've both said that. President Trump has been really clear about the fact that he doesn't want war. What the Europeans are worried about and what many Americans are worried about, and rightly so, is unintended consequences of this tit-for-tat escalation that's been happening over the last few weeks. Oftentimes in instances like these, somebody does something that the other side overreacts to, and then a war starts and nobody can control the escalation. That's what the Europeans are really worried about. Not that anyone is deliberately going to make the decision to go to war, but that some miscalculation happens on either side, and then the decision is made for them, basically.
And of course, Iran knows that it would never win an all-out war with the United States, which is the greatest military power on earth. But Iran, as it has pretty much said this week, does have the capacity to cause some pretty significant mayhem in the region. There are US troops in Iraq. Iran has its proxies in Hezbollah, in Hamas and elsewhere, in Islamic Jihad, and elsewhere in the region. Is that what we're going to be looking at? A long, drawn-out, low-level intensity conflict?
Absolutely. I mean, we're fairly certain that that's what it would look like. I mean, there is just a very little chance that President Trump would get the United States involved in another ground invasion in the Middle East, especially when he campaigned so heavily on getting out of that, getting out of all the messes that he called them that were caused by his predecessors. And so it would be very surprising to see the U.S. try to get into another ground conflict with Iran. That's why just even recently we saw, in response to the Iranians shooting down the drone, there were cyber attacks by the United States, there were sanctions, but there's no talk of a conflict. Now, you mentioned proxies and you mentioned a long drawn out process. That is exactly what we have to worry about. Iran has proxies all over the region in places where there are not only U.S. troops, but also U.S. interests, U.S. allies, U.S. installations. They could do significant damage. And over a very long period of time, we saw it happen in Iraq before. United States forces are still in Afghanistan. I mean, these are the types of war that the U.S. kind of gets sucked into for years and years on end and finds it hard to extricate themselves from. So that is something to worry about.
What do you think's going on behind closed doors in Washington? Do you think there is really this division that's being talked about in the media between Trump and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo? Do you think they are the ones pushing for military action, whereas Trump is very much against it because, as you say, he's always promised not to go to war in the Middle East?
Exactly. And if media reports are to be believed, it was actually a Fox News host, Tucker Carlson, that talked the president down from a strike at the 11th hour. So there is very much a tension between, I think, what the president's instincts are, which are not to go to war, which is to try to bring Iran to the negotiating table, and his top advisors like Secretary of State Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, who are much more hawkish, much more aggressive, and much more likely to recommend kinetic action. That group also includes Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham, who's become quite a close advisor and a confidant of the president. So I think the president behind closed doors is constantly weighing the advice that he's getting from these hawkish advisors and his instinct and his gut and his promise to the American people, which is that he's not going to go to war.
Jasmine El-Gamal, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, imagine